Where cider ends, there ale begins to reign, and warms on Brecknock hills the Cambrian swain. High on the summit of King Arthur's chair he sits his steed and breathes untainted air. Looks down on Hereford with scornful eyes, esteems himself a native of the skies. Puffed with the thoughts of his exalted birth, he scorns the humble mushroom sons of earth. His high descent from time's first dawn can trace, from Gomer down to Owen Tudor's race. There's none so great on this terrestrial ball, himself the ragged emperor of all. This mountain prince outflies ballooning kings, a cloud his car, the winds his whistling wings.
Yes, once upon a time, every Welshman was a prince in his own land. Today, we are all common men, and the prince comes down from London. Much the most splendid royal event of the last 25 years was the high ceremonial of the investiture at Carnarvon Castle. For one morning, Wales was the cockpit of royal Britain, and all the world looked in. But even the best television programs come to an end. The captains and the queens soon departed, leaving Carnarvon to harvest the tourists and bicker bilingually over yet another half-alien event in its long and living history.
There is no present in Wales, and no future. There is only the past, brittle with relics, wind-bitten towers, and castles with sham ghosts, mouldering quarries and mines, and an impotent people, sick with inbreeding, worrying the carcass of an old song.
The poet is not to be mocked, but there are new songs in Wales too, and some of them are sung in Welsh here at Carnarvon. The music of the people is always made outside the walls of the Norman castle. For this is a town with an independent spirit, and a place which is rather self-conscious about being on the visiting list of royalty. The mayor in 1969 was I.B. Griffith.
Yes, I was here in this castle 8 years ago. I remember the day, well, the castle was full of song. Sir Geraint Evans, Elizabeth Vaughan, all the great singers, they were here. It was the day of the investiture. I went down to the Watergate to receive the royal party. When I got there, it was chaos. Everybody were running everywhere, and I thought, we will never hold an investiture like this. It'll be terrible. And then the first coach arrived, and the Queen Mother came out. She looked round. She said, "Isn't Carnarvon beautiful? It gets lovelier every time I come here." In 2 minutes, she had everybody at ease. It's a very remarkable gift. Then came Princess Margaret. All she was concerned with was Lord Snowdon, her husband, the constable of the castle, was here in the castle. Will the door open? Has he got the key? Are you sure everything is all right? Then came the Queen, the Duke, and the Prince. But none of the three had anything at all to say. I greeted them in Welsh. That may have put them off a little, I don't know. But they looked tense, they looked nervous, And I thought, this is going to be the biggest flop of all time. And then the door opened. And when they saw Snowdon in that Robin Hood suit, they burst out laughing. The Duke was astonished, and I will swear to my dying day that it was that Robin Hood suit that saved the investiture in Carnarvon that day. One thing I could not do then on investiture day was to petition the Queen. Had I been living in medieval times, when royalty used to hold a surgery, as mayor of a little town, I probably could have done so. May I do so now? Your Majesty, the most illustrious of your forebears, Elizabeth I. Her father, the son of Squire Archie from Anglesey, her mother, Anne Boleyn, the daughter of East Anglian clothiers. She, in 1588, gave this little country, and especially this language of ours, the finest transfusion it's ever had. She commissioned the Bible to be translated into Welsh. Those young people out there are singing a new song in a very old tongue. These last 25 years have been very bitter and difficult and tough years for the Welsh language. Would it be too much for me to ask Your Majesty to tell your ministers that it is part of their task to save this old tongue of ours, so that in hundreds of years people will say in Welsh that in 1977 the second Elizabeth did for the Welsh language what the first Elizabeth did for it in 1588.
400 years does not seem as long a time in Wales as it does in other, less Celtic places. Across the straits from Carnarvon is the Druid island of Anglesey, our most ancient land, with its monuments of a prehistoric royalty. Who can number the sands of the sea? Who can name the great men of Anglesey?
Pwy a rif dywod llifon, pwy ryddi lawr wir mawr môn. A wenyddol iawn oeddynt yn gynnar, medd ceisar gynt. A droddwch mae'r derwyddon, urdd mawr a fi'n harddu môn. I'r bedd yr eithant o'r byd, och, alar heb ddychwelyd.
Those treasures of prehistory were found in a lake near the RAF base at Valley, and Prince Charles is only one of the many trainee pilots to have broken the peace of Llyn Cerrig Bach. But from the air, Anglesey seems far more committed to an industrial future than to the relics of a distant past. It was the railway which first hauled modern industry into Anglesey, and Anglesey flourished because it was no longer an island. In this present reign, some of the most advanced industries of the 20th century have been established on the island side of the bridge. But 7 years ago came a costly warning that the scientific wonder of one age can become the peril of the next. On the night of the 23rd of May 1970, the tubular bridge over the Menai Straits accidentally caught fire. And if a 19th century bridge can catch fire, how about a 20th century nuclear power station? No doubt the Electricity Board have as much confidence in the safety of their design. And of course the bridge was secure for over 100 years. Along the coast from the nuclear power station is the newest offshore oil terminal in the world, and Britain's first. Although the huge tankers will be unloading at sea, There's little risk of spillage, some of the experts say, and to have built the terminal at all is a major engineering achievement. The seas off Anglesey are not as polluted as those of Glamorgan, but pessimism is no stranger to the Welsh, and the fate of our wildlife over the next 25 years seems precarious. Mercifully, some among us are doing something about it. Police Constable Ken Williams of Holyhead, 25 years in the force, can't arrest the 20th century, but he's trying hard to divert some of its nastier traffic away from the newly imperiled birds of Anglesey. For P.C. Williams is a man with a mission. This aluminium smelter, for good and ill, is here. But its impact on the area's wildlife has been minimized by the police constable's caution. The aluminium company was talked into turning most of its surplus land into a nature reserve, which is now administered by the evangelic policeman. It's an unorthodox compromise between the apparently opposing interests of industry and conservation. Here the proud and the lame share the same off-duty police protection. A wise arrangement and a timely one.
Of course, we have big industries in Anglesey, and bigger the industries, bigger the threat to wildlife. And this particular bird, curlew, has struck a wire, and but it doesn't look too bad, and we can clean it up. Curlew is a wading bird, and it's got a habit of being struck by heavy gales, and very often finds itself against wires. There we are now. So we'll clean it up a little bit, we'll strap it later on. Now if you take it to the hospital cage, I'll come and see it later. Hold it very carefully, now you go with them. The curlew was all right. That was just an act of wind and the rage of the weather. But this poor chap, not so lucky. The chuff, only 3.5, only 4 pairs in Anglesey, now only 3.5 pair, due to some deliberate act of holiday vandalism, in my opinion. A shot, shattered, broken leg, and a shot back. When I catch this chap who shot this poor bird, by God, I'll have my helmet on, and if I have my way, he'll be down for 3 months. This is an isolated case. Society itself can be criminal too. Some idiot, about 9 years ago, decided to put something on our very own island, siting a refuse tip close to one of the most important turneries we have in this country. It has caused more damage to us in Anglesey than any industry you could bring in. The terns, the moor wennel, the sea swallow, what a lovely name, breed on this little spit in the inland sea part of Anglesey. They have bred here since time immemorial. And at one stage there were 500 pairs nesting here. But last year it was a sad story, a very sad story indeed. 500 pairs came here, that's true enough. And they tried to breed, that's true enough. But only 2 pairs managed to hatch their chicks properly and fly away to Africa at the end of the breeding season. The reason is, 1/4 mile from this turnery is the refuse tip. Domestic rubbish dumped from all parts of Anglesey, attracting vermin of all kinds. You name the vermin, they're here. Any eggs they see, they eat. Any young terns they hatch, they kill. You can't blame the herring gulls. I mean, you can't blame them. The people we blame, the people who sited the tip here. It would be a really wonderful thing if in this Jubilee year that this tip would be closed once and for all, and that the terns could return from the migration in Africa back to here to peace and solitude.
In fact, Ken Williams can walk his beat rejoicing because before the Queen arrives at Holyhead this summer, the rubbish tip will have been closed and the herring gulls diverted elsewhere, perhaps to the once aptly named Puffin Island. Here, less than 25 years ago, the little yellow-beaked puffin bred prolifically and gave its name to the island of Siriol, the Celtic saint, whose chapel is now a ruin. Saint and puffins have gone. Not a single pair nests here now. Herring gulls, fat on the refuse of towns far away, have possessed the island, and after thousands of years have altered its nature absolutely. We are in this part of Wales so near the big towns of northern England that not only the wildlife but the land itself is under siege by man-made pressures undreamed of 25 years ago. We like to think that whatever else, the hills remain. But even in winter, they are not undisturbed. Eryri, the country of the eagles, is by now the land of the walker, the hiker, the climber, the tourist. For tourism has become an economic necessity for North Wales, and Snowdonia is an open-air industry. But much of the splendor is here still, and the men who protect it are themselves part of the flora and fauna of the hills. The chief warden of the national park is John Roberts.
There are still a few quiet places in Snowdonia if you look for them. We still have the moraines and the glacial deposits, and even more, those simple little flowers, the Arctic alpine flowers, like the purple saxifrage, Saxifraga oppositifolia, one of these flowers that has been here since the Ice Age. Very tiny little thing comes out at the end of the snows, the flower that can be found in the Alps very high up today. So these are the quiet places where the flowers grow. And in amongst all these hundreds of thousands of tourists that come to Snowdonia, you can still also find one or two indigenous Welshmen around the place. And one of these, of course, in Snowdonia, a very distinguished person, is Ivan Roberts, a full-time warden for the Nature Conservancy. Ivan Roberts first found the purple saxifrage, and this is what fired him on to find these other flowers, the ones that have been very rare. He can remember Snowdonia before they designated a national park, and all the changes that have taken place in the 25 years. He has been here to see it all.
If you take my own life, for instance, 25 years ago, or about that the quarry closed. Well, it was the mainstay of the village of Capelcarrig in those days, and I was brought up as a quarryman, and things looked pretty grim. We had a lot of visitors, of course, in those days, and they were mostly people that came here for the quietness of the mountains. Most of them were clergymen. In the old days, if you went and climbed what we know as the Snowdon Horseshoe, well, it was just a path, and you had to follow it, a very narrow path, and keeping to the ridge all the way up. Well, nowadays, well, it's like the M1, and the wear and tear is terrible in that way. There's one thing I ought to say, it hasn't affected the vegetation as much as you would expect it to be, because the rare plants, could I say, or the important plants, are on rocks which are not really suitable to climb. They are rocks which are more friable and they weather very, very quickly and so turn into some kind of soil. They do most of the climbing on the very, very hard lavas, what we know as rhyolites and such rock as you find on Tryfan, you see. And the place today, of course, is getting cluttered with climbers more than anybody else. If a fellow falls on Tryfan today and gets himself killed, we never bats an eye. Now, you see, well, going back only 25 years ago, if that happened, well, that would be the talk of the town or the talk of the quarry.
The preservation of natural beauty is the proper concern of many worthy bodies, but maintaining people among the hills seems to be the business of all and of nobody. The emigration which began half a century ago goes on, and while cities over the border become ungovernably huge, the communities of mid-Wales have withered. But there are some new buildings in our countryside. This is the Tryweryn Reservoir, built by and for the Corporation of Liverpool. Our village of Capel-Celyn is under the water.
There are places in Wales I don't go. Reservoirs that are the subconscious of the people, troubled far down with gravestones, chapels, villages even. The serenity of their expression revolts me. It is a pose for strangers, a watercolor's appeal to the mass, instead of the poem's harsher conditions. There are the hills, too, gardens gone under the scum of the forests, and the smashed faces of the farms, with the stone trickle of their tears down the hillside.
Come on, move it! Get up here! Right, start getting started with the fire gun now!
The depopulation of mid-Wales can be absolute. A large part of the old county of Breconshire is controlled directly by the Ministry of Defence. It is the third largest military range in Britain, and even the old name of these hills, Epint, is following its 54 farms into decay. 25 years ago, there was some hope that this land could be returned to agriculture. World events stopped that, and by now very few of the original community are left even in dispersion. Ronald Davies and his mother, who still live not too far away, can rarely return to their native place.
I remember it was a glorious autumn, lovely sunshine every day, and one day this army car drew up at my grandfather's place, and they were doing a survey, and they gave a hint that day that they had their eyes on this valley and a lot of other ground to make an army range. And then, perhaps with typical ministry goodwill, the notices to quit arrived on the day before Christmas in 1939 by post.
Well, of course, the great advantage of Senny Bridge is the vast variety of terrain that you've got here. 30,000 acres in all. There are 2,000 acres of forestry, lots of valleys and streams, and of course the hedgerows and old buildings of the derelict farms. There's plenty of open heathland too, of course, so that you have the chance to train over just the sort of land you meet in Northwest Europe. It's an all-arms training area.
54 farms were involved, and we must remember that these people, they just survived the depression of the 1930s, the farming depression. They'd all survived this, and I think they were rather a low ebb before this bombshell came. And it's surprising looking back in this day and age how little protest there was. Because I'm sure you could imagine if this thing happened today, what an outburst there would be, and I don't think it could have happened. But the war had just broken out and everybody felt very insecure in their lives, and this was one of the things that just came and was accepted.
It was heartbreaking when I went from here, because I was brought up in the district and we used to go to this chapel, you know, and I've got two sisters been buried here, my grandmother and grandfather and my aunties, you know, so there's some flowers blooming in the graveyard, and they're just by my sister's graves, and I expect my mother planted them. And that would be about 40 years ago, wouldn't it? It's a long time that they're coming out every year, isn't it then?
Well, I feel that it should never have happened because they took such a big piece and they've never really utilised the whole area. Perhaps there was need of an area, but in these things always is somewhere else that it should be, isn't it? Not where you are fond of.
Far to the north, on the shore of the Llyn Peninsula, there is emptiness of a very different sort. A quarry closed, and for almost a quarter of a century, the village of Nantgwthaeron has been empty and derelict. But unlike Epint, there is hope here, and a vision that this remote place can become not a village again, but, incredibly, a college, a study centre for the encouragement of Welsh and other Celtic languages. And this is the dream of a new sort of leadership which has emerged in Wales in recent years. People who will not move away from the old villages, but work to bring new life into existing communities. Carl Klaus is the doctor here, which gives him a chance to earn a living locally.
Well, this is probably one of the most Welsh-speaking parts of Wales. It's a very strong community here, a very strong tradition of community. At the last census, in fact, something like 92% of the population spoke Welsh. Take the village we're coming into now, for example, Llysfaen. This is a very small village, some 150 people or so by now. There are none of the very stark problems that one would see in Nantgwthaeron, in the ruined village. That is, there are no obvious ruins here. But nevertheless, a large percentage of the houses here are empty for approximately 50 weeks of the year. That is, their second homes, holiday homes, and for the most part, the reason for their existence would be naturally a decline in community, a lack of work, and a lack of young people in a position to buy the houses, not having found work in the area. In the parish that I live in, for example, the population declined in the year 61 to 71 by some 20%. It declined from 1250 to just over 1,000 population. And of course, in social terms, this is a tremendous loss. It doesn't take a scholar to realize that by the turn of the century, the population will be minimal, and indeed, more important, will not be able to maintain the basic services. Large-scale industry is not going to take notice of an area such as this. Given that, and equally given that local governments and central governments find it politically difficult to help in terms of the capital that is to be had out of it, then I think the movement must come from within the community. We must act as one and demand the facilities and the work that make a community a viable entity in the 70s. You don't have to create new towns here. The community already exists, and it's a natural unit which deserves and needs to be developed.
And Carl Klaus and his neighbours have already begun the business of investing in their own community. This little factory is owned and run by the village. Their cooperative workshop is the first new enterprise to take shape here for decades. Their cooperative makes pullovers and pots. But its real end product is a healthier countryside, a village that can maintain at least some of its young people within their own community. At first sight, this is just economic self-help, but the vision is of a youthful society inheriting an ancient culture. The scale may be small, like so much else around here, but on this northern peninsula of Wales, everything must begin in a small way. Even so, fires which are started here have a habit of spreading rapidly, and the smoke can often irritate nostrils very far away. Closing down a country school may seem a small thing, but in rural Wales it was becoming a major industry until the planners took on the villages of Brincroes, and this school became rebel headquarters.
The parents of Brincroes knew in their hearts that it was wrong to close their school. But distant authority decreed that it was not in line with their policy of centralization. So, our school had to be closed. Nobody offered any valid educational reason, but it was tidier. It was meant to be cheaper. We tried everything. Reason, persuasion, argument, protest, direct action, civil disobedience. And we tried at every level. The local education authority, the Department of Education and Science, the Welsh Office, the Ministry, the Prime Minister, and even a humble petition to Her Majesty. And everything was accepted. And still the procedure for closure continued with a fatal inevitability. And the building was left empty. But not for long. We broke in here, and the children were taught in their village school once more. For 9 months, they were educated here at the expense of the parents and with nationwide support. But in the end, the authority brought threats of crippling fines, long prison sentences against the dozen protesting parents. The whole terrible majesty of the law was invoked to drive a few children out of their village school. And the school was closed. The children we have here today will not be educated in Brincroes. Our battle had been lost, but had it? No rural schools have been closed in Wales against the wishes of the parents after Brincroes. But of course, it is easier for those who believe in order and organization to close rural schools and uproot the community. A neglected graveyard needs very little attention and no administration.
Life can be maintained in the countryside. 25 years ago, there wasn't a spark of fire or puff of steam in the rusty boilers of the Festiniog Railway. Today, its great little trains carry hundreds of thousands of passengers a year, and it is the largest of British Rail's private competitors. And there are 7 other resurrected lines, like the Festiniog, now puffing around North Wales, steaming testimonies to the power of faith and hard work. Steam has returned to one of its kingdoms. But up there in the hills, there is a powerful new source of energy which turns the wheels of industries far away. The nuclear power station at Trausfynydd was welcomed by the local people as a new employer of labor in a neglected county. By now, it is an important part of local life, and around here very few questions are asked about whether atomic power is safe. and none at all about the international implications of nuclear fission. But 20 miles to the south, there are people who think of little else. Their place is marked by a ring of windmills built on the debris of the dead slate industry. For Roderick James, it's a symbolic setting.
These strange windmill shapes which we see here may look a bit out of place in the countryside, but in fact they're not nearly as alien as the nuclear power station at Trawsfynydd. Here, in a disused slate quarry at Machynlleth, we have a rather exciting demonstration called the Centre for Alternative Technology. And we're trying to demonstrate here how we can harness the massive amount of energy available from sun, wind and water. Whether we can produce enough food and energy without destroying our environment. And we believe that we can, but only if we stick to some pretty rigorous and fairly old-fashioned principles, really. The decision about whether it's cheaper is really irrelevant. The fact is there isn't going to be any energy if we're not careful.
And so the dwelling houses here are heated only by the power of the wind and the warmth of the sun. The whole place reflects a concern for the future which is conspicuously absent in the rest of the country. Gardening without factory-made chemicals is naturally a feature here. But the emphasis is on generating electricity and then saving it. This demonstration house is so muffled up with insulation that electricity bills, even without windmills, are negligible. And people who aren't a bit worried about the energy crisis are mightily concerned about saving a pound or two.
We want as many people as possible to come here and see what we're doing, to see some of the ways in which it's possible to harness the massive energy from the sun and the wind, and also to draw their attentions to some of the incredible dangers of the nuclear power stations which are beginning to surround us in Wales. And if people are in any doubt as to the sort of dangers which are posed by nuclear power stations, not from an explosion perhaps, but from the horrors of a plutonium economy, of terrorists, they should try and get insurance cover from their insurance company. And we applied for insurance cover 9 months ago, and not one insurance company has been prepared to insure the centre against nuclear risks. And this is for a type of energy which the government assures us is safe as anything else, any other manufacturing process. Well, if you want insurance for a solar panel, you'll probably get it. We know where we are with solar. We don't know where we are with nuclear.
In South Wales, we have for generations now been creating our own suns. And in the last few years, some of them have been becoming progressively cooler. The steelworks at Ebbw Vale is a current candidate for closure, and the thousands of men who work here, faceless before the furnaces, are experiencing fears which many believed had been banished from these valleys forever. But there is a tradition of resistance here which may yet serve this area well. Pamela Davies is only one of its many voices.
It's criminal to think that over the next 2 years that we are going to lose the works, lose 2,500 jobs. And we in Ebbw Vale, we just cannot let this happen. My father and his 6 brothers gave 250 years service to the works when the works first came here in 1930. And he always felt that the works would always be here. It was a depression time when the works came, and it looks with the works going to close, then it's again going to be a depression area. Money should have been put into this works 10 years ago, not just leave it as a dilapidated state, as they did. Everyone in the community must make sure that we just don't suffer. Families, husbands losing their jobs, moving out of the area. We've got to do something about it this time. The community is built around the works.
In Gwalia, in my Gwalia, the Vandals out of hell ransacked and marred forever the wooded hill and dell. They grabbed and bruised and plundered because their greed was great, and slunk away and purchased the meadows of the state.
Our Victorian ironmasters of 100 years ago built castles to their arrogance. But, unlike our modern corporations, they were human, identifiable tyrants. And at the last, one of them at least revealed an unexpected sense of humility, and on his tombstone his remorse is recorded in letters of brass. What, we wonder in Wales, will be the epitaph of the British Steel Corporation? Their investment here over the 25 years has been great, but the demands of trade have overridden the real needs of the people. A new town for the workers looks efficient, but one of its children's poems reveals its inner bleakness. Childhood in the deprived valleys was never like this.
What a place! It's a pity it was ever built. So cold the air, so cold the people, so stark the buildings. No inviting atmosphere, no laughing people. What cheer is here? What a grey place. It's so new. There is no feeling. Yes, so new, so hard, so mean. There's not the attraction here at all, like that of an older, warm and living town. Just people bustling up and down. No time to stop now, Mrs. Jones. No one is talking, meeting, chatting. Just a bleak and dismal town.
These valleys are the wailing walls of Wales. They have known so many of our woes, but their warmth, their friendliness, and their battered solidity are also our greatest glory. Coal mining has declined over the last quarter of a century, But despite that, our valleys remain masculine and muscular communities. New industries and new interests supplement the old, but they remain places where family bonds are strong and children cherished. Cherished more fiercely in this particular village, perhaps, than anywhere else. And for good reason. The valleys change, but as long as mining lasts, the old values will not disappear. And now, after a quarter of a century of contraction, the mining industry in South Wales looks forward to a more prosperous future. But at the same time, the nature of our cities is changing visibly. The heavy industries of Cardiff are fading into the background, and the newest capital in Europe is turning itself into a filing cabinet. Offices, offices, and yet more offices, and the traditional tang of the city is being lost. This was never a very Welsh-speaking place, but the language in Wales is as much of a symbol as of a reality. It stands for so much of our past.
We have lost the old tongue, and with it the old ways too. It was one with the homemade bread, the smell of cakes at missionary teas, and the shadows falling remotely on the unattempted hills. Even the hills are diminished. They are a gallon of petrol there and back. The old salts rot, and the bread is tasteless as a balance sheet. Oh yes, there have been gains. I merely state that the language, for us, is part of the old abandoned ways. And when I hear it, regret disturbs me like a requiem.
Pob un mewn, gwthiwch, edrych am y bil, siaradwch â gilydd, bil yn ôl, da iawn, mas ag allan.
Once, every Welshman was a prince in his own country. And even today there remains one place where we can still sing out our fantasies on 2 or 3 afternoons a year. And each one of these boys is sure he's on his way there. Wales may be more than a rugby team, but sometimes you wouldn't think so.